Move the committee report it favorably to the House. The clerk will report the bill.
H.R. 2267.
Without objection, the bill is will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The NICS Data Reporting Act is a simple and straightforward piece of legislation that many of our colleagues here today have voted for on both sides of the aisle. It simply requires the Attorney General to submit to Congress a report that includes the demographic data that they already collect when they do the background check. They collect this data on 4473s, such as race. And, you know, when in sales, they say when you've got the sale, quit selling. And so I don't want to oversell this, because this is the identical language that we've all voted on before, but it did pass as an amendment to a bill introduced by Mr. Nadler. These were the golden days when we worked in bipartisan fashion, and I offered an amendment, and we got this done on the, and that bill actually passed the floor of the House. So it was a Democrat bill. You all incorporated my amendment, and it passed the floor of the House. Then, last Congress, this committee also unanimously reported this bill out, and hopefully we can advance it out of this committee now. Let me tell you what the bill does, or the concern that we have, and what I'm trying to address. And Mr. Ivey spoke to this last Congress. He shared the concern. It was actually our late colleague, Ms. Jackson Lee, who also shared this concern with me and spoke for this bill. Here's the concern. When you undergo a NICS background check, if you have a name and or birthday that's similar to somebody who's been convicted of a crime, a disqualifying crime for firearms ownership, you could be falsely denied. Now this happens, we understand, but we estimate that it happens 3 times more frequently for blacks and twice as frequently for Hispanics, because within ethnic and racial groups, you share first names and surnames as well. And there is a large population of blacks that is incarcerated or has committed crimes and have been convicted, and because they share these names. And by the way, probably, I'll say this from my side of the aisle, over-incarcerated. And so it's not fair. It's built into the system and it needs to be fixed, but to fix something, we need to see the data. And that's what this would do. This would require publishing the data so that we can all look at it and see what happens. Because once you're denied, your options for owning a firearm are to go to somebody else, not through a background check. It's the only way you can do it. If on appeal you don't succeed, and if on first appeal you don't succeed, you have to hire lawyers, it becomes expensive, and you may be deprived of your Second Amendment rights simply because you had a surname and a first name that were similar to somebody who was incarcerated or had been convicted. So hopefully, hope to get this passed out of here without much debate or discussion. I want you to note that in the bill, it asks for the ATF to report sex and gender. Now, this isn't because I've gone woke. It's because the ATF used to ask for sex and then they changed it to gender, or vice versa on the form. And so we need to know that data. There were some conservative groups who were concerned that I'm asking for sex and gender for some liberal reasons, but maybe I just took a reason away for you all to vote for it. But the reality is, on the form, it changed from sex to gender or gender to sex, and we need to collect that information. Also, we're not asking for more information to be collected on the form 4473 when you undergo a background check. We're just asking for them to report the data that they already collect, and we're not asking for personally identifiable information. This is not to create a registry. We just want to know to what degree this is a problem. And so with that, I urge my colleagues to support this bill, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Raskin, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To prove to my friend that bipartisanship is not dead and the spirit of common ground, common sense legislation still works, I will support the NICS Data Reporting Act and recommend that we all support it. I do have this question after your interesting preface to filing it, Mr. Massie. Do you think the Attorney General will even be allowed to write the report that you're talking about? Will she be allowed to publish it? Given the war on so-called DEI and race and gender discussion and description, because, I mean, I've got constituents who are being fired for reasons like this. I had one constituent, her job was to assemble patient pools for drug cancer tests, and one sentence in her job description said, and to do outreach to diverse constituencies in order to make sure that there was a cross-section of patients being tested, and she was fired as a DEI employee. So those words are radioactive now in the administration, and I'm just wondering, what the practical effect will be. And you seem to gesture at this a little bit. You hasten to assure everybody you hadn't gone woke, but you still thought it was important for us to get this information. I don't think that we should ever be afraid of information or facts or data. Despite the full-blown war that is taking place against facts and data at the National Weather Service, at NOAA, at the NIH, and throughout at the EPA, the Department of Agriculture, throughout the government. So I'm asking with all seriousness whether you think the Attorney General would even comply with what it is you're asking them to do. And I don't know if it's appropriate in my opening statement to be able to yield to you, but I would yield to you.
No, it's not. The gentleman's recognized for an opening statement.
So therefore, but I agree with it. I think that the political perils of the gentleman from Kentucky's amendment demonstrate what a serious situation we're in America right now, where it seems like certain words have become forbidden or illegal. The Associated Press was banned from certain parts of the White House because they dared to call the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of Mexico. And there's some other real bad words out there now under the Trump-Musk regime, including equity and diversity, and I think women, gender. But I have some constituents, Mr. Chairman, who are in the military service in Germany, and they were sent a memo, which I actually showed in this committee, saying that the school libraries for the kids of military families would be closed for 7 to 10 days in order to make sure that the books and the learning materials in the libraries conform to the new executive order against equity ideology. I thought the Declaration of Independence was equity ideology. I thought that was the whole premise of American democracy, that all of us are created equal. But in any event, that seems to be a basis now for purging books from the library in complete violation of the First Amendment, a special insult to the people who are serving us all over the world. So in any event, I just have that question. I hope at some point Mr. Massie will be able to answer it, because he's moved perilously close to committing a thought crime under the new Trump administration simply by asking the question of what the racial effects and the gender effects are of particular legislation. Having said that, I'm happy to support it, and I hope all our colleagues will.
Without objection, the gentleman yields back. Without objection, all other opening statements be included in the record. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute.
I offer the amendment in the nature of substitute.
Okay. Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the
desk.
nature of a substitute to HR 2267, offered by Mr.
Without
Massie.
objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute be considered as read and shall be considered base text for the purposes of amendment. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky to explain his amendment.
So, as I said before, it's a very simple bill. We're just asking the the FBI and DOJ to report the statistics that are collected on the Form 4473 to basically quantify the degree of racial disparity that may result in these NICS background checks. And that's as simple as it is. It's passed before, it's passed here unanimously, twice out of this committee, passed on the floor once. I urge support for it. And to answer Mr. Raskin's question in his opening statement, we always have a problem with the administration, whether it's Republican or Democrat, getting them to respond to Congress. And if they do, I expect this administration to follow the law. And if they are tardy in giving this report to us, when the Attorney General comes to this committee to testify, it'll be the first question I ask if it's not been submitted to us, this report. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, on its face, the legislation seems innocuous, but I'm just wondering, why is it necessary? What is going to be accomplished?
Here's, the gentleman,
Yes, sir.
allow me to answer a question. I'm concerned that there are inaccuracies in the NICS database, the way it works. For instance, if you have your name is spelled phonetically, if your name is phonetically similar to somebody in the database, it will catch you, it will flag you. If your birthday is similar, not exact, and if you did this, let's say you were hiring bank tellers at a bank, and you had a background check system that ended up flagging 3 times as many people inappropriately of a certain race versus another race, you would be sued out of existence. But the federal government can get away with this. And what I would prefer to see is, if we're going to have a background check system, that it work accurately, that it deprive those who shouldn't be allowed to have a firearm, but it doesn't deprive those who should be.
Does the gentleman believe that that is a very persistent problem today?
This idea came from somebody I know who worked at the DOJ, was not able to publish data, but could see it there as well. And
That person believes that there's just a horde of people who should be eligible to purchase a firearm, but were rendered ineligible due to a deficient background check.
we do have a GAO report on this, and in 2017, there were 112,000 denials and only 12 federal prosecutions, even though the ATF referred thousands of those for investigation. So it's clear there are a lot of false denials. Now, they can be appealed, but it's a tiered appeal process. And if you don't get a remedy in the first appeal, it starts becoming expensive. And so it does exist, and it happens thousands, tens of thousands of times every year. There are false denials, and those denials, I believe, have a racial disparity that's built in.
Does this legislation call for the disclosure of false denials?
Yes. It would disclose denials, not, and then appeals.
False denials.
You will know the false denials when you see the number of appeals that are granted.
So the answer is no.
No, we can, they will have to report how many initial denials by race. Then they will have to report on appeal how many were denied and subsequent denials. If you, for instance, have 100,000 denials and 50,000 are appealed and overturned, then those were false denials.
Well, I don't see any language in the bill that would call for a disclosure of false denials, just demographic data on all denials.
Correct. I'm working in good faith here, and I think I want to explain, if somebody appealed their conviction and the appeal was granted and the conviction was overturned, I would characterize that as a false conviction. And so that's how we'll know false denials by race, because if it was a legitimate denial, the appeal wouldn't have been granted.
So this legislation also calls for the identification of the person who was denied. Does it call for personally?
No, there would be no personal identification.
Just broad categories of folks denied. And so if it should occur, if it should appear after this legislation is passed and reports are submitted that there were more, let's say, black people in the country, or people who are identified as being black, than whites, then what would you do with that information? What would that information mean?
You would try to improve the system. And instead of using phonetically similar names, you would use exact spellings. Instead of using approximate birthdays, you would try to use accurate birthdays. You would do what they would do in the private sector, which is to try to make sure you don't falsely deny somebody and that their system isn't set up to bias for race or ethnicity.
Gentleman's time has expired. Further discussion on the amendment, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you. And I'm going to be guilty of the same sin I guess the ranking member was, because I want to say I support the legislation. I'm not sure why anybody would not. But he then went on a tirade about equity and equality. And I had two choices. One was to sit there and just listen. I don't want people, the few people that happen to be watching this still, to think that means that we agree or we don't have an answer. So to answer Mr. Raskin, the ranking member, there is a difference between equity and equality. Equality, we are absolutely granted in the United States of America. It means that you have the chance to compete, that you are given equal access, that you, if you work as hard or are as smart or do as much, or whatever the case may be, that you have that opportunity. It should be a nation of equality, and when we are not, we have to fight to make sure that we do get to that point. Equity means you get the same result. Regardless of what you have, what you do, you're just gonna always get the same result. That isn't life. That isn't the way it works. And what's happened is, especially in government and in education, and even spread to the private sector as well, every department, every agency, every division was hiring not always based on the best, the brightest, the most focused and talented, but on this artificial construct, this mechanism that we had to have all different kinds of balance. And not even sure what the balance meant. You know, I'm gonna tell a story. I'm not making this up. You're not gonna believe it, but a nurse and a midwife in my state, in the state of New Jersey, this is a state law, let me be clear, it's not a federal law, contacted my office and they sent over a form that's given to parents with a newborn. This is a newborn. The baby's just born. For anybody that has children, you can relate to this. Your baby's born, you're there, husband and wife, whatever the case may be, and that baby's born. They ask if the baby is transgender. They ask if the baby is lesbian, LGBTQ+, heterosexual, and questions along those lines that are in depth. A little baby, you can't, they're trying to be so woke and so perfect. I couldn't believe that they asked those questions of parents when they have a newborn, and it wasn't for the parents, it was for the newborn baby. How do you know that with a newborn baby? This is crazy stuff. This all gets classified under crazy and too extreme. And American people don't like it and they don't believe it. So there are a small percentage of people that think that we want to completely restructure America in this way. It doesn't make sense. And that doesn't mean that we should do anything harmful to people that are different. It doesn't mean that these people don't have a right to succeed as well. It simply means that we all compete together, and then you let the chips fall where they may, that the best rises to the top, regardless of race or color or creed. We had it in our transportation, we had it in the EPA, we had it in, like I said, every division, agency, department. I mean, it was unbelievable. And guess what, folks? It costs billions upon billions of dollars to do that. Billions that don't go for better education, billions that don't go for more schools, billions that don't go to help veterans, billions that don't go to help senior citizens on nonsense. It doesn't make sense. And that's what I want to say back to the ranking member. It's not a desire to take freedom away. It's just a desire to return to some level of normal. That's all it is. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back to further discussion. Gentlelady from Wyoming is recognized.
Thank you. I yield my time to the gentleman from Kentucky, Mr. Massie.
I thank the gentlelady from Wyoming in response to the gentleman from Georgia's question, how prevalent it is, there were 22,615 appeals challenging a NICS denial with the FBI. This was in 2023. Of those appeals, 6,263 resulted in a denial being overturned. And so it's happened at least 6,263 times in a year. And the way, when we go look at the initial denials, and then you look at the ones that were overturned, and you go in and separate that by race, if you find out that there were more denials overturned for people within a certain race, then we can infer things from that. And the first denial, 93% of denials are dropped because you do a paperwork check, and then they find out it was a false denial, which results in, there's no lawyers involved. But if that first paperwork check doesn't fix it for you, and by the way, some people may just walk away and not exercise their Second Amendment on that first denial, but another 2% are dropped at the regional offices. They just do an additional check. If we just compared the race and sex of those who are initially denied with the race and sex of those cases that have been dropped at each of those first two stages, then we can from that divine whether this process of the NICS database process has a problem that results in a racial disparity. And I yield back to the gentlelady from Wyoming.
Would the gentlelady yield for a question?
Yes.
Thank you. Does the legislation call for the reason for the denial to be listed along with the demographic information requested?
If the gentlelady would yield to me to answer. They already disclose NICS data by category. The problem is they don't include race within that. So, for instance, some of the categories could be a fugitive from justice, misdemeanor, crime of domestic violence, illegal alien, dishonorable discharge. We have that data, but we don't have it. We don't have the racial data.
Would you be able to link it to the information provided under this legislation?
This just asks them to report the race, sex, and whatnot by category. Not like you couldn't go in and divine something from the Form 4473 to get personally identifiable information.
Mm-hmm. Seems like it would be sensible to know the basis for the denial along with this other information that is sought under this legislation.
Yeah, we can, getting a report from them is the first part. We could work with them to get that report with the FBI.
Well, why don't we amend the legislation
we can't,
to provide for the disclosure of the reason why the...
I'm open to your amendment.
And I'd certainly support that amendment.
If we could do that on the floor, or if you want to offer an amendment right now, we could do it, but maybe you want some time to think about what it would be.
Okay, well, I'd love to work with you as this legislation proceeds to the floor.
There would be nothing more disappointing to me than to get this bill passed, get the president to sign it, and then to get a report that doesn't give us the information that we need. So if you have ideas for improving it, I would absolutely be open to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I yield back to gentlelady from Wyoming.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Is there further discussion? Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
I'm just going to speak very briefly in support of my friend from Kentucky's bill. I think it is important. I'm glad there's bipartisan support for it. I would note, similar to my friend from New Jersey, the extraordinary difference in what is attempted to being done here, contra the ranking member's assertion. This is focused on ensuring that the power of government is not being used against its citizenry for, in this case, reasons that would be inappropriate. And I think that's a real core distinction. We can have our debates about DEI all day long, but debates about what the executive orders about the president, what we're doing on DEI, I agree with the president's executive orders. That's trying to pare back discriminatory practice in our view. But all this is doing is simply saying where the power of the government is at its zenith to be used against the people, to deny them a fundamental right that is enshrined in the Constitution, that we ought to be mindful of how it's being used, collect the data, again, follow the truth wherever it may lead. Let's get the facts. I support the bill. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, the question is on the adoption of the amendment in the nature of a substitute. This will be followed immediately by a vote on reporting the bill. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. The opinion of the chair is the ayes have it, and the amendment in the nature of a substitute is adopted. The question is on favorably reporting the bill as amended. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, and the bill is ordered to be reported favorably to the House. Members will have 2 days to submit views. Without objection, the bill be reported as a single amendment in the nature of a substitute incorporating all adopted amendments, and staff is authorized to make technical and conforming changes. Chair understands that votes are about to be called on the floor, and therefore the committee will stand in recess.